being with us in this later session than usual. And the reason being is because we have a presenter all the way from the New York office speaking. So it's around 9 a.m. London. So I think that's it. Now, to begin with, guys, allow me to just inform you that our mobile clinic, the one that does the free COVID-19 testing, has actually been to more than 83 destinations in total. Today they were in Rashaya, Al-Fakhar, Far Hammam, Farshuba, Shaba, Habbariya, and Fardis. And should you want to know exactly where our next destinations are going to be, please log on to the LU website, Tumanunike, guys. You can pretty much have all the info you need, and we will be happy to see you and have some free COVID-19 tests on that matter. Now, regarding today, guys, not only are we starting a little bit later than usual, but our session as well is going to be extended beyond the 1 hour. I do expect our session to go for around 55 minutes or so, in 1 hour in total, and we will follow that up with the Q&A session. And the reason I want to actually stop at this point for a second is simply because نحن بلبنان تعرفوا الحكومة would like to actually cut the electricity off. So in case you had any problems at around 6 o'clock, your Wi-Fi is off or so, please note that نحن باقيين and you can rejoin us as quickly as your Wi-Fi is back on. Now, again, something different for today's session. We do not have only one speaker. We actually have a group of panelists. And I introduce them one by one, starting with Dr. Lina Abirafeh, who is the Executive Director of the Arab Institute for Women at LU. We also have our second panelist, Dr. Mary Kawar, or Kawar, who is the former Minister of Planning and International Cooperation in Jordan. Our third panelist is Dr. Stephanie Chaban as well, who is the Regional Gender Advisor for Gender Justice, Population and Inclusive Development Cluster at the United Nations ESCWA. And our event is going to be moderated not by myself, but by the director of the Arab Institute for Women, the person you see on your screen, Ms. Miriam Square. Now, allow me just very briefly to give you a simple introduction on today's talk, after which Miriam will take over. Now, I'm not sure if you guys have had or if you guys have heard what the UN Secretary General has actually spoken about in terms of a brief policy on the impact of COVID-19 on women. And allow me to quote him on this matter. With the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, even the limited gains made in the past decades are at risk of being rolled back, and hence our session today, whereby we intend to address both the short and long-term impacts of this COVID-19 crisis on women's rights and lives, both in the Arab region and globally, with specifically addressing a few topics such as violence against women, economic security, and vulnerable groups as well. So with that, guys, I will leave the floor for Miriam and our panelists to take over. So Miriam,
thank you. Good afternoon or good morning from wherever you're joining us. Hope you're keeping safe in these difficult times. So I'm very happy to have you all with us. Hi, Lina. Hi, Mary. Hi, Stephanie. So let me tell you a bit about the Arab Institute for Women. We at the Arab Institute for Women at the Lebanese American University are convening this panel, as Robin said, to shed light on the situation of women in light of this global pandemic that has wreaked havoc to everything normal that we know and has hit vulnerable groups the most. For those who aren't familiar with exactly what we do at the Arab Institute for Women, we're an institute that was established in 1973 to preserve LEU's legacy as a college for women. In fact, AIW is the only institute of its kind in Lebanon, the first in the Arab world, and one of the first in the region. In the world. We at AIW work at the intersection of academia and activism, where we create shared knowledge on women and gender issues, and we bring together academicians, scholars, policymakers, activists to work on creating space for dialogue and shared agendas. And if you want to know more about the work that we do, of course, you can visit our website that is available on the screen very soon to appear. So, as Robin said, if we move on to talk about the Arab region, we all know that we're not faring great in terms of gender justice. This is a fact. So, perpetual insecurities, ongoing conflict, economic challenges, and now a global pandemic have magnified pre existing vulnerabilities where women are suffering the most. Women all over the Arab world, from Syria to Iraq to Libya to Sudan to Yemen to Palestine to Lebanon to Egypt to Tunisia, raised their voices against injustice and demanded long overdue reforms and kept going to the streets protesting regardless of the dire situation on the streets. Women have been at the forefront of the protests in the Arab world, being vocal about injustice, fighting for gender equality, and aspiring for change in a region that's so resistant to change. Feminist demand took center stage where the personal became political. It's true that this slogan for some is now a cliche. However, it never fails to resonate with the reality on the ground. Revolting against the status quo and countering the backlash against women's rights was the route activists decided to take in their resistance. With this, there's actually a global backlash against gender equality and human rights. And so, with COVID-19 and the fact that it has exacerbated things, where abuse of gender rights is at the fore, we realized that a discussion ought to be made. And so, we are going to be discussing today with our three experts, as Robin said. So, we have with us, as also Robin said, we have Lina, who's our executive director based in New York. Prior to joining LAU, she has 20 years of experience working on gender issues in emergency and humanitarian settings, and her work has always focused on GBV in emergencies. So she's worked on post-conflict and natural disasters. So and she's worked with various UN agencies. So she's an ideal person to talk to us about what's happening. We also have with us Mary Kawar, who's a former Minister of Planning and International Cooperation in Jordan. Mary has 20 years of experience working in the International Labour Office, and she's worked in different countries all over. The last post that she was at was in East Africa. She's worked in Geneva, and she has coupled with that, she has 30 years of experience in government and international development across the globe. And I'm so happy to have you with us, Mary. Also, we have Stephanie, who's the regional gender advisor at the Gender Justice, Population and Inclusion Development Cluster at ESCWA. We work very closely with ESCWA. Stephanie has 10 years of experience working on researching issues impacting the human rights of women and girls. And she's currently at ESCWA, where she advises member states on topics related to gender justice, violence against women, and women, peace and security. Of course, our experts have very many publications. The session now is not the time to enumerate all of them. So Lina, I will start with you. And I just want you to walk us through this global pandemic, COVID-19, and how has it impacted women and girls globally and in our region.
Thank you, Miriam. I'm going to speak from the perspective. Oh.
Sorry, can I just say one thing? Whoever isn't speaking should mute his microphone. So I'm going to mute mine, and we're all going to mute ours. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to speak from the perspective of gender-based violence, which we know happens everywhere all the time, crises or not. But in crisis, this is magnified. And what happens in emergency settings, and COVID-19 is no exception, is that it amplifies all of the pre-existing vulnerabilities, making women and girls much more vulnerable, creating new forms of violence. The other thing that we need to know is that these forms of violence, in any forms, don't end miraculously when the crisis ends. This continues. So for women, these crises go on and on. It's a cycle. And even though we have increased global awareness, it hasn't led to increased action in a significant way in terms of prevention, response, and risk mitigation. Cases are underreported all over the world. That's a truth. Funding remains scant. Rhetoric doesn't match the reality because we speak about our response far more than we're actually responding. But if we speak about COVID specifically, what's unique about it is that it's global, which means what's happening to women, we talk about violence, isn't happening to other women over there. It's happening to all women. So this is the most unfortunate form of a grand leveler, if you will, really in the worst possible way. Women are also the world's carers. So personally and professionally, they're putting themselves at risk of infection. They are working as nurses, as healthcare workers. They are caring for the sick at home. So they are exposed constantly. Even the language that we've used for this pandemic, things like social distancing, where we actually mean physical distancing, I think it's a really unfortunate term, not my favorite, has a negative impact on women because those who are already living in situations of violence don't have that kind of luxury. So messages that we have disseminated, like stay at home, assume that home is safe, and we know it's not, even though it should be. So for me, these things are really serious errors and omissions. If we talk about intimate partner violence specifically, the restrictions of movements, amplified insecurities, all of that has made things much worse. Women are trapped more than before in situations where violence did exist. It's gotten worse. New cases have emerged. Women cannot seek any safety or support where it even exists. With situations where resources are being diverted, the police and justice systems are deprioritizing their response. So this is leading to impunity. We're talking about 2020, 25 years after Beijing. So all countries have ratified. 630 million women are living in countries where domestic violence is not considered a crime. That is a staggering statistic. So for me, there's something fundamentally wrong in the world if, in a time of global crisis, women are at risk even in their own homes. We understand the situation, facing economic insecurities and job losses and disruption of routines and social isolation. But the fact that women face this additional risk of experiencing violence supposedly at the hands of those who love them, for me, is unacceptable. And I've seen it in every single emergency I've worked in. Other forms that we need to deal with, and certainly this applies to the region dramatically, sexual exploitation and abuse is going to happen and is already happening because of shortages, because of new dependencies. We are seeing things like sex for food, sex for rent, sex for supplies. In quarantine centers, security checkpoints, makeshift health centers, armed forces, police, etc., they will all abuse their power. We saw this during the Ebola epidemic, and I wonder if we actually learned anything from that. So we're talking about things that are situations that will magnify these risks. Let's speak about girls actually for a second, because they also are facing some serious forms of violence in terms of the missed education and missed opportunities that they are currently having, that will increase the risk of sexual exploitation, unintended pregnancy, increasing forced marriage because parents are going to offload the economic burden that is their daughter. Even increased cases of female genital mutilation have been documented. So we are looking at, based on UNFPA estimates, an additional 2 million cases of FGM and 13 million additional cases of child marriage. Trafficking, because people are preying on those who are vulnerable, certainly. With resources stretched and services lost, we have seen GBV incidents increase dramatically. For instance, in Lebanon, online harassment has increased 180% as a result of this. GBV hotlines have doubled. In addition to physical abuse, there's a range of economic abuses, blackmail, threat of taking away children. The risks that those who are vulnerable or marginalized face is certainly amplified. Female migrant domestic workers is one example. And the problem is the economic challenges. I mean, for Lebanon, this is in addition to all the other risks they're facing, all the other hardships. So all of this is amplified. In Syria, we know that female-headed households are facing deep and severe poverty. Many of the IDPs are women, loss of homes, etc. This all puts women at greater risk and forces them to resort to riskier measures for survival. And certainly Syria's fragmentation and the continued violence and warfare is only going to make people sicker, and women will bear the brunt of that in so many various ways. In terms of refugees, like Syrian refugees in Lebanon, also a risk. They have even less ability to report, to seek support and services for any cases of violence. Yemen, the world's worst humanitarian crisis. The funding shortages and diversions of funding are compromising already scant GBV programming and really stretching sexual and reproductive health and rights services. They're inadequate or they're totally unavailable. Palestine, similar restrictions on movements. There have been double the calls to GBV support hotlines, and Palestinian women's voices are going largely unheard, especially in the response to this pandemic, which is entirely unacceptable. In Libya, women are afraid to leave their homes or even access health facilities unless they're accompanied by a male family member. GBV service is already limited, and there's a serious fear of increase of domestic violence, and it has already happened. We don't need to keep collecting the numbers to know that this is going on. In Iraq, the same thing, IPV, intimate partner violence cases perpetrated all around the country. In any case, what we're looking at is something that is very severe and that is not going to end when the pandemic ends. I have a long list of requirements. I'm going to save them for later. For now, I will leave you with those staggering and sobering statistics and hope that it galvanizes us into action and takes this seriously once and for all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lina. Thank you. That was amazing and very sad as well. So you basically covered what's happening globally and in the Arab region. Now I will move to Mary. Hi, Mary. I can see you now. So basically, we know that female labor participation is low in the Arab region, with female unemployment reaching 19% in 2019, as opposed to 8% for men. So given your ample experience working all over the Arab world and even globally, in light of this global pandemic, what, in your opinion, are the economic implications of COVID-19 on women's labor force participation?
Thank you so much, Miriam. It's actually a pleasure to be with you and to see you, and regards to everyone from Amman. I will build on what Lina just said in terms of pre-existing vulnerabilities. I will also talk from my experience. I will focus on the non-Arab Gulf nations because it's a different issue, and I don't have a lot of information on conflict-affected countries. So, in general, it will be Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, Egypt. But one major issues in our region is the low female economic participation. The world average for 2019 was 51%. So all over the world, 1 in 2 women are working. In Jordan, it is around 14. In Lebanon, it's around 25. In Palestine, it's 18. In Egypt, it's 21. So we are really below the world average in terms of participation. And women remain an untapped source, and for many reasons. Access to knowledge, discriminatory laws, absence of support for workers, issues related to family responsibilities, etc. However, I'd like to give you a little view on the economic situation in the Arab world and how it affects women before the current pandemic. Okay. The regions, we had the economic crisis, started the global financial crisis in 2008, then followed by the Arab Spring, then followed by the Syrian refugee crisis. And the countries that I am referring to have experienced low economic growth rates. Low economic growth rates means limited creation of new jobs for men and women. And the structure of our economy, it's based on small and medium enterprises. They are family-based, and family-based enterprises are averse to change and modernization. We have a large informal economy, and we basically have a structure that is divided between a lot of people working very securely in the government vis-a-vis those in the small private sector. We have a division between those in the private sector, between those who are in the informal economy that don't have any access to safety and social security and etc. We have, especially in Lebanon and Jordan, a large number of migrant workers who are performing the low-end jobs. So this kind of compresses the working conditions and compresses the wages very low, not giving the unskilled Arab workers, men and women, the opportunities. So this is really the challenge that affects women and men. But we have the division between women and men. As I said, the value for work is for women is still not very appreciated. And many other, I think, issues related to transport, issues related to childcare, issues related to family attitude, etc. So let me talk a little bit now on the pandemic. First of all, women are not a uniform category, okay? So many women will face their economic circumstances and experience in the labor market are quite different. But in general, they are concentrated in fragile work. For example, home-based workers, okay? And if we talk about the pandemic, home-based workers have dwindled the demand for their services. Women entrepreneurs are fragile and they have very small profit margins. Women who provide services in the informal economy and the value chain related to their services. For example, if you cook for a school, the school is closed. So your access in terms of what you provide services to the informal economy has stopped. Women in manufacturing, probably either they have been laid off or their wages have been cut. But this also affects men as well. But we have some manufacturing that has a concentration of women, like in food and textiles. Even in the case of Jordan, women teachers, because we have a very fragile teaching in the private sector where employers will cut your salary during break, they will withhold your salary, they will pay you less than the minimum wage. It's a very difficult sector for teachers. So as I said, every sector will be faced with different circumstances. But basically, the issues are we have less job security, less formal wage work available, and most important, the access to health insurance in the world of today, which is the pandemic. So I fear that also the government response so far has not taken into account the different repercussions between men and women. And I want to use an example from Jordan to demonstrate this. The government came up with a support through what we call the National Aid Fund, which is Jordan's establishment for social assistance for those who cannot work or those who are old or disabled, and they get monthly stipend. So the government decided that they will provide workers in the informal economy or daily wage workers who lost their income with a stipend for the month of March and April. That sounded very good. Everybody was excited. Then we go to the mechanics of this. And the mechanics with this is that only the head of household using what we call Daftar al-Aile, the family book, can apply for this. And we know even if you are the main breadwinner in your family, you are rarely put as the head of household in terms of your IDs. So this is just an example that shows you that the responses of governments have not really taken into consideration the differences between men and women. I would like now to actually talk about something positive and something that I am actually excited about. And I think that we have a ray of light. And that is the transformation to the digital economy that is taking place everywhere in the world today. Now we need apps for deliveries, for online learning, for everything related to your life. We have been talking about the future of work and the fourth industrial revolution, but I think we're there. I think we are living it today. And data shows that today, 1 in 3 startups in the Middle East is created or led by women. And this is a higher rate than Silicon Valley. So I am quite excited at the potential job creation as we move into the digital economy, where the legacy of discrimination does not exist, where we have a new space for Arab women. And work can take place anytime, anywhere, and work is based on your output, not whether you are going to an office from 9 to 5. So this is one of the silver linings. So in conclusion, 3 points. Women are concentrated in fragile sectors. The government is really not looking at the differences between men and women in terms of their response. And the third point, we do have something to look forward to in terms of the move to the digital economy. Thank you, Miriam.
Great, great. And it's very interesting to see a positive aspect to that. We are currently operating from home. And as you said, it's not based on clocking in and clocking out, but on deliverables and the work that you can do from home. Thank God you can do that. So I will move now to Stephanie. Hi, Stephanie. I can't see you.
You can't see me?
I can see you now. Yes, I can see.
Okay. This is all very new technology for me, so sorry.
See me?
I can see you. I can see everyone. Yeah.
No, you should see me and the new technology. So, Stephanie, based at ESCWA, and in specific, the Gender Justice Population and Inclusive Development Cluster, and you're actually working on a regional response to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on women. Can you tell us more about that? And can you tell us about the implications of COVID-19 on the rights of vulnerable and marginalized groups, and how you're addressing these issues related to those groups who already suffer triplefold? So can you tell us a bit about what you're doing at ESCWA?
Sure. So for those who aren't familiar with ESCWA, it's the Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia. I work in the Gender Justice, Population, and Inclusive Development Cluster. Formerly, it was solely the ESCWA Center for Women. We've expanded now to address broader issues. And so just so everyone knows, ESCWA is the regional arm of the UN Secretariat based in New York. And so we represent the UN, the Secretariat's interests in the region and the region's interests in the Secretariat. Therefore, just so everyone knows, we do not provide services directly. Rather, our clients per se are Arab states, so the governments. So rather, we work directly with and support Arab states through ministries and their agencies to respond to the needs of all populations, including the most vulnerable and marginalized. And one of our target populations is working with women and girls on gender equality and women's empowerment. So let me just jump ahead. So as the regional entity here in Lebanon, based in Lebanon, we have convening powers, meaning that we are able to bring governments together to discuss regional concerns. And so one of the main things that has taken place since the rise of the pandemic and the lockdown that's happened globally, if not regionally, is that we've had two intergovernmental meetings that were held last month in April, April 22nd and April 23rd, respectively, with the participation of 16 Arab states coming together to discuss with ESCWA and with several other UN agencies and amongst each other what they're currently doing, and to learn from experience of their colleagues what can be done to assist not just women and girls, but all populations. And so we had, as I said, two meetings. The first was focusing on gender equality, and the second one was focusing on social protection. So with regards to gender equality, states presented some of the actions that have been taking place. Again, this is what they are reporting, and this is what we intend to support them either to continue with the work that they're doing or to improve upon the activities. So just a sample of some of the activities that are taking place. States have committed to creating more hotlines for reporting violence against women. They've been implementing extensive health awareness and education campaigns to access all populations. They're providing uninterrupted health services for women and girls. They are providing free treatment to all injured people, citizens, and residents. They're providing economic advice to female entrepreneurs. They're creating social solidarity funds for fighting the virus, and also to provide services to certain populations, such as pregnant women and those with special needs. Some states are creating free platforms for complaints on gender-based violence. And others are committing to provide economic incentives and mechanisms for financing small and medium enterprises, including targeting women and women entrepreneurs specifically. In terms of social protection, and I will show the slide a little bit later, will show you. Member states are primarily focusing on these 5 interventions: cash assistance to support the poorest families, in-kind aid, including food, medicine, and protection kits, organizing and facilitating loans in the short and medium term, granting rebates or exemptions from some of the fees and taxes due to the government, and 5th, securing sufficient stocks of food, medicine, and basic commodities. And economists at ESCWA have estimated that this has cost about 6.3% of the GDP of the Arab region. And so another activity that we've been doing is putting together policy briefs for member states. And we've thus far produced 7 on broad topics, including the general economic impact of COVID, food security, water security, trade and foreign investment, price and expenditure statistics, the regional emergency response, and then one that we've specifically put together with UN Women and other UN agencies in the region is a brief on the impact of COVID on gender equality in the Arab region. And this is the cover of the brief. All these briefs are available on our website. So the brief covers a series of topics that are being discussed at this meeting, but the main topics covered include poverty and lack of economic opportunities. Economists at ESCWA have estimated that women's employment will further be weakened. And again, Dr. Mary was mentioning this. ESCWA estimates the loss of 1.7 million jobs in the Arab region, including approximately 700,000 jobs held by women. Furthermore, they're highlighting the fact that many women are already tenuously employed, and many are already in the informal sector. We address food insecurity and malnutrition, particularly in crisis and humanitarian settings. Access to information, including technology and distance learning. I know Dr. Mary just highlighted the amazing input of women and girls in the region in terms of startups, but in many cases, we're seeing also that households do not have access to computers, and if they do, men and boys are the ones privileged with their access, and so some girls and young women are losing opportunity for education, being educated from home. In terms of GBV, as Dr. Lina already mentioned, we're seeing increased numbers in violence due to forced isolation, forced coexistence, a lack of services or access to services, the deprioritization of services, police and justice services being limited, and then also an increase in online violence. And then finally, we discuss humanitarian settings. Again, Dr. Lina covered many of the concerns that are being highlighted, including close living conditions in women as caregivers, women as, being denied access to proper sanitation, the increase in violence against women and sexual exploitation and abuse. So if we could just keep on this slide. Another thing that we've created is a daily clock and online stimulus tracker to highlight, one, the rates of infection within member states and also what member states are doing in terms of policy. And so the link is attached to this page. Likewise, if you just go to ESCWA's website, you'll find the link immediately on the front page. But we have an online, we have a daily clock that highlights all 22 Arab states, their infection rates, deaths, and recoveries. And then if you could move to the next slide, please. We have also put together an online stimulus tracker that highlights 160 countries' response in terms of stimulus packages, 16 of which are Arab states. And so you're able to look by region or by topic, and it will highlight the types of interventions that each state is taking in terms of some populations, but also in terms of field. And so these are the main things that ESCWA is doing with member states. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I have two questions that I will take now, and then I will move on to ask you another question. So this is from somebody attending. What does it mean to be employed in the informal sector? This is the first question we got. And why and how is online violence increasing? So Mary, maybe you can answer the one on informal sector, and Stephanie and Lina will answer the one on online violence.
Thank you. Actually, this is a great question, and it gives me an opportunity to elaborate a little bit on what is an informal sector. An informal working relation is a formal working relation is that where there is a contract between a worker and an employer, a legal contract that abides by the labor law. Often we don't have a legal contract or no employment relationship between the worker and employer. This makes the worker vulnerable. They don't have access to social protection, or if they have a work accident or pension in the future, if the employer does not pay them, there's no legal recourse in any way. So the worker-employer relation is actually governed by the labor law. There's another way of looking at it in a very straightforward way, as that is any worker who does not belong to the social security, the social protection mechanism in the country, like the NSSF in Lebanon or the Social Security Corporation in Jordan. So that's another way of looking at it. So also there is many workers in the informal. You could be a street seller, but you could have your own enterprise that you haven't registered and you're making money, but you don't want to register so that you don't pay taxes. You could be a domestic worker, but also you could be a teacher in a formal school, but the employer has not given you a contract. So there is many formulas, and they all relate about not giving the workers their full rights under the labor law.
Thank you so much. And the one on online violence increasing, why and how is online violence increasing? Lina, do you mind answering? And then Stephanie will continue.
Sure, absolutely. I'm happy to do that. Well, we've moved to more of an online platform. So this is where we're communicating. And we've seen this before. Cyberbullying and cyber harassment are not new. They've been amplified as a result of this because of the way that we're communicating with each other. But things like threats, rape threats, comments made against feminists, activists, women who are doing this work or raising the alarm about what's happening to violence against women are being silenced online, are being threatened and quite severely. And these things, as we've seen in the past, pre-COVID, they don't actually just stay online. They tend to also manifest in real life. Girls are particularly at risk with more communication. Well, that's the only form of communication they have. So things like sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, young girls sending photos, being blackmailed because of those photos. Those are the kinds of things that we're seeing, and we're seeing them everywhere. But the dramatic increase in Lebanon is really because of this lockdown, because of what's been going on with economic hardship. And so people have resorted to online for their communications. And what you say online, again, when it comes to women, anything you've ever said on Twitter or any other fora does not, unfortunately, stay online. I can say much more, but I'm going to leave it there and let Stephanie take over. I'll have some recommendations to share at the end.
I'm sorry, can you see me? Okay, there we are. So yes, Lina covered it very clearly what is happening. I mean, based here in Lebanon, I've been seeing many campaigns online warning about this. So RDFL has been posting videos of warning women and girls to be careful in terms of their interactions online, and that the harassment, the stalking, the bullying, etc., is violence. It doesn't matter if the person is in front of you or not. It doesn't matter if you see this person on a regular basis. What happens online is still violence, this form of harassment. I would also add that the fact, as Lina pointed out, like this is one of the sole forms of communication that's happening. And so it's an opportunity. And so if people are conducting their social lives online more so now than they were before the lockdown, you do have this, I would say, this vulnerability to engage with people or maybe tolerate something that you wouldn't necessarily outside of the lockdown. Not that that legitimizes the situation, but there might be more opportunities for perpetrators to harass. I would also just add, and maybe this wouldn't be defined as violent online violence, but the fact that women and girls might not be able to access online, to access services, to know what is available in case something is happening within the home or elsewhere. And so the denial of access to a phone or access to a computer or any other type of device is also a form of violence in order to get services and to know what's available. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I would like to say here about online violence. Prior to COVID-19, UN Women did a study about online violence against women who ran for elections in Lebanon, and they enumerate cases where online violence was used to try and deter candidates and to bully them from running for elections in Lebanon. I urge you to check out that study that was launched at LAU. We're also at the Institute working on violence against women reporters and by following their Twitter feed, but that's regarding your question. So if I am to basically recap on what you said and then ask you all to please answer this question on your advice to our policy makers regarding how to best address this pandemic. Let me just make a small recap of what has been said. So obviously globally, violence against women, as you said, has increased, sexual violence has increased. There are positive and negative implications to women's economic participation. So basically there's more burden on these women. Migrant domestic workers has been raised by you as well, and the situation of marginalized groups and vulnerable groups and how they're suffering, and the basic actions that are being taken by civil society organizations to showcase everything that's happening, to discuss violations and whether physical, psychological, or online, and all the work that's been done to highlight all the important work that's being done on the level of UN agencies, on the level of civil society organizations. So if we are now, as a result of everything that we've discussed and talked about, to advise policymakers on how to best address this pandemic. Lina, I'll start by you. You said you have many recommendations, so can you basically walk us through them?
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, we couch things in very soft terms, and I'm not going to say recommendations. I'm going to say requirements, because I don't think we always need to be so polite. It's about time that we make some demands and make them very clear. And this applies to absolutely everyone: donors, policymakers, implementers, even the private sector. Gender-based violence needs to be prioritized in terms of prevention, response, and risk mitigation everywhere, all the time. These are life-saving services. They have to be classified as essential. Hotlines, safe spaces, sexual reproductive health and rights, referral networks and pathways are necessary all the time. And why we haven't pre-positioned all that stuff after decades in this field still baffles me. These are even more important in crises. Let's also learn something from the Ebola outbreak and other experiences, that epidemics and pandemics leave women and girls particularly vulnerable. We saw this during and we saw this after Ebola. And women's groups, women leaders, feminist responses have to be involved in the development, in the delivery of services, leading the response every step of the way. When we talk about response, case management, shelter, medical care, referrals, all of that stuff, the minimum initial service package for sexual reproductive health in crisis, MISP, needs to be applied. Thinking through things like who has access to technology, can it be used to reach those who need help? Finding innovative ways to adapt the technology. I've seen or heard of things like apps that are being used for online reporting, or places that use hand signals on video calls to show distress. So women can let people know that they need help, that they're in a situation that is unsafe. Cash assistance for survivors that needs to be administered, obviously carefully, but is going to be essential. Economic empowerment that is both a prevention and a response vehicle. All of this needs funding. I mean, real funding. We keep crying for it. Again, I'm a broken record. Exclusive support for women and girls in all funding appeals. Not hidden and embedded and fractions of percentages, but real funding, combined with political will and women engaged at all levels of leadership and decision making for the response and beyond the response. We do not need to keep proving that this exists. We know it. The emergency is not going to end when this pandemic ends. There is not going to be any miraculous stop to COVID-19 and we all spring back to normal like mushrooms. It will not happen. What I want to see is that our response to this pandemic can actually be more meaningful for women than other responses have been. I'm asking myself, is it possible? I'd like to believe it so, but present evidence is pointing to the contrary.
So Mary, you go next regarding your advice.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of general advice and three that are more specific. The general one is to continue with the agenda. The pandemic is not an excuse to halt any progress towards women's economic empowerment efforts. I know Lina just told us about the deficiencies of policies, but if you look at the country level, especially with the support of civil society, there has been a lot of progress. So my first point is continue. Don't allow the pandemic to make the women's issues come as second tier in terms of priorities. The second one is that any response, any governmental response related to the economy and related to social assistance and social protection should take into consideration how has this pandemic affected women and how has this pandemic affected men. I am watching very closely the news in Jordan on a daily basis. And what I see is the female ministers have disappeared, the male ministers are more in the forefront. I see that the response has taken off like a strong male, and a lot of it is about social assistance, a lot of it is about healthcare, a lot of it is about sectors that has a lot of women. So now my specific points. I think if anything, this pandemic has shown us in the Arab region and outside the Arab region, the importance of universal healthcare and the importance of strong social protection systems. And social protection is a social solidarity mechanism where workers contribute all their lives and employers contribute all their lives so that you can get a pension at the end, that you can have unemployment insurance, that you can have health insurance, and you can have security if you have any work accidents. This is a major, major institution for any stability for any country. So it shows us the importance of strong social security mechanisms. The second point is it's about time to address the issue of the informal economy. We cannot go on having two economies, one formal and one informal, while the private sector is benefiting from the cheap and unskilled labor of those in the informal economy. It's time that we upgrade it. We encourage informal enterprises to register in social protection mechanism, maybe give them 1 or 2 years of exemptions. It is time that we look at give people incentives to be registered and legal workers and not penalize them and not look at the informal economy as, oh, those workers who are not paying taxes and we need to increase our tax base. No, this is the economy and this is society, and we need to find a way that it is a win-win for everybody. And the last point is related to the care economy. What I mean by the care economy is all those systems that are informal or formal related to childcare, elderly care, disabled care. It could be a creche, it could be a domestic worker, it could be your neighbor next door. This whole area of care work has been increasingly important, especially today in the West, you know, when we have the age pyramid where we don't have young people and we have a lot of old people. But if anything, women who stayed home, women who stayed home these days find themselves that they are either have increased family responsibilities, working from home, with the online working of their children, or they have the schools closed and they cannot, if they have to go back to work, the schools are closed, and where would they leave their children? And that is the case of Jordan, and women activists are up in arms because last week the economy opened, women are supposed to go back to work, but the daycare centers and the schools have not opened. In the West, in Europe today, if you are a family member who is essential and who is working, you have access to childcare. And we find that in the Arab region, we are so far behind in the thinking of the care economy that this is not even thought about. So 3 issues: social protection, upgrading informal economy, improving the care economy.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And I have so many questions that I'll read to you and you will answer from the people who are attending. So Stephanie, you're up.
I just saw the Q&A part. I didn't realize there was an option. I see there are many questions that I'll happily answer on the chat as well, if that is appropriate. Sorry for ignoring those. So I'll just cover a few that haven't been discussed. These are recommendations that have come out of our policy brief and other consultations with member states, as well as other UN agencies. So there is some overlap, although again, to remind everyone that we work at the government level. So a lot of this is very policy oriented. So one of the main things within the context of the pandemic is to ensure that governments collect gender disaggregated data. As with any type of situation, what doesn't get counted often doesn't count, and so this is an important step. Likewise, there should be more robust monitoring and reporting frameworks to understand the gendered differences in exposure and treatment, as well as the socioeconomic impacts. We need to understand what's happening to all populations, and it shouldn't just be gender disaggregated. We need to look at these other populations that often fall through the cracks. Another thing is that we should include women and girls in not just as frontline responders, but women and girls leaders. And I noticed someone asked a question about the Women, Peace and Security agenda in the Q&A chat. So we need to, again, stress the involvement of women and girls in the COVID response as well, at all levels, not just the government level, but local leaders as well. And again, looking at the various populations and the way that they can engage and ensure that the government has a holistic response. Mary spoke briefly about strengthening social protection coverage to ensure that women in different age brackets have equal access to social protection policies. This is also something that we would ask. Likewise, that national fiscal stimulus packages continue to promote national priorities for the inclusion and advancement of women in employment. Government should guarantee that women, particularly displaced, refugee, and migrant women, have access to affordable, quality, and equitable healthcare services. So all women, not just those considered citizens. And this should include sexual and reproductive health services as well as GBV services. GBV services should be considered a life-saving service that should not be cut. In terms of circulating messages about COVID, we would also ask that such messages are relevant, are dispersed in relevant languages and dialects. Again, not everyone in this region speaks Arabic. We have, like I said, migrant populations, refugee populations, to ensure that everyone understands how to be safe and what services are available. As Lina outlined, the expansion of GBV services in as creative as possible, as comprehensive as possible, in terms of remote counseling, psychosocial support, shelter provisions, any type of creative solution in order to reach out to women and girls. We've also been calling for a regional platform on efforts in the Arab region to combat violence, along with awareness raising. So again, this is something we've been working on pre-COVID, is to ensure that member states have a better dialogue in terms of who's doing what and learning best practice, and see if there's ways to network and to learn from others' experiences. Likewise, we call upon ministries of education to develop tools for distance learning. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes girls, particularly in remote rural areas, in more impoverished areas, are more easily left behind because they don't have access to the proper technology. So this is something that should be looked into, whether it's in terms of using television, radio, or other forms of communication. And finally, we ask that government counterparts and key international actors ensure that specific needs of women and girls of all backgrounds, particularly those more at risk, are met, including their ability to access information on preventing and responding to the pandemic in ways that they understand. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That has been very helpful. So I have so many questions over here. Let me just see. I'm gonna read some of them and have whoever can answer them. So, what has been the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on Arab women's peace building efforts, including the implementation of national action plans on women, peace and security? Also, I have a question, if you don't mind taking notes. I would like to ask presenters about the recommendations to make actual change in rural areas, for example, or in camps. Those are remote areas where the effect of law are minimum. Another question, you talked about the possibility for women to thrive through internship, given the positive numbers currently, yet it's worth mentioning that they mean entrepreneurship. Mentioning that young girls and women don't have access to technology. So how do you think it would be then possible to follow the dynamic in the region? Then I have another question. COVID-19 provided an opportunity to assess the current GBV mechanisms in the Arab world. What are advocacy efforts on regional or national levels to address the challenges within the existing GBV mechanisms for mitigation, response, and protection for GBV? I'll take one more question and stop. And this is a question for ESCWA. The ESCWA data set shows high rates of female labor force participation for Kuwait. One, does this not include migrant workers? And two, what's happening to migrant workers in other Gulf countries as a result of the pandemic? Thank you. So I don't know who will start. I might have an answer.
I'm happy to start on the GBV side.
Lina, go ahead.
Okay, so this is a really interesting question that this response and the pandemic has maybe prompted a rethink or an assessment or an evaluation of GBV mechanisms, nationally and regionally. Well, I would love to say yes, absolutely it has. But we repeat this pattern in every single crisis where we realize, oh my goodness, GBV is happening, as if it's a new thing that hasn't happened before. So first of all, I think our constant rediscovery of GBV has become exhausting. Now, GBV mechanisms in the region, and I would even say globally, are generally weak, scattered, fragmented, territorial, under-resourced, inefficient, and only spring up in emergencies when there is a crisis. This needs to happen all the time. Coordination, prevention, response, risk mitigation, all of these things, resourcing of programs to finally end violence against women needs to be a part of our daily lives, our essential services, whether we're in a crisis or not. So I don't think that there has been a strong enough advocacy nationally, and certainly not regionally, because we don't even think regionally often enough. And that's an unfortunate thing, because when we look at crises, conflicts, pandemics, certainly, they don't like to respect national borders. So we cannot continue to be as strong as we'd like to be if we stay within our boundaries. So that's one challenge. The other is that because this is something that we constantly have to struggle for in terms of legitimacy and space and human and financial resources, all we are actively able to do is respond immediately to what's in front of us. It's a constant band-aid. So longer term things, more strategic objectives like prevention and risk mitigation tend to be afterthoughts, and we're talking about things that we really don't pay enough attention to. So I would love to say absolutely yes, we've come up with new ways to work and strengthened our advocacy, but I think we are just struggling for survival, and I wish that weren't the case. So there would be your somewhat cynical answer. Someone with something more positive to say, please add to that.
I could just add a brief thing. Maybe more, it's more of a band-aid, but I mean, I'm seeing, going back to the creative responses. I mean, unfortunately, it's mainly in terms of combating GBV, or at least addressing it. It's more civil society and grassroots efforts than the state. That said, we have received numerous queries about how to improve service provision under COVID. So states are interested in terms of what that will look like in terms of implementation. That remains to be seen, but there is an interest in responding right now, and states are speaking up. But again, though, the people, the populations, the agencies that are mostly responsible and picking up the slack, I would say, are civil society, women's organizations, and this has always been the case.
Miriam, I can take the question on rural development.
Yes, please go.
Okay. What I'd like to say about rural development is not directly related, and of course focus on rural women, is not directly related to COVID. I have no information how it is affecting rural people vis-a-vis urban. We always assume that once you are in urban, you are more exposed to the virus. The problem with rural areas in the Arab region is that they are economically disconnected, and there has to be economic policies that focuses on a concrete value chain of production, where what these rural people or what these women produce is part of the economy, as not only something that is marketed through NGOs and through cooperatives. And no matter how many programs and projects we have seen that focuses on rural women, we continue seeing this disconnection. We are not connecting them to the proper economic structures. Another issue is economic diversification. We find rural people, and rural women in particular, producing the same things, whether it is handicraft or food or what have you. So we get stuck with this lack of economic diversification. I don't see any seriousness from governments to take the issue of rural development and the upgrading of skill and the economy in rural areas seriously. And that goes because of the approach to economic growth has been through large investments and multi-million-dollar projects. So we forget that actually today with the COVID, we are talking more and more about self-reliance and the importance of local production. The second point that I think rural people and rural women in particular are always excluded is the state of social policies. Social policies are always seen as those who are very poor, unable to work, those who are marginalized, some widows, some disabled. It is, and we give them stipends. It's like a top-down approach where we are providing people with stipends. But social policy is one side of a coin, where the other should be economic policy. So social policies should assist people with the skills and with the connections and with the expertise and with finance to be able to work. But our social policy remains in terms of this welfarist approach. And lastly is, I think, education reform. Our education and its representation of women and the quality of education that has been dwindling, I do not think it provides rural women with the empowerment that is needed. Neither is it changing the mindset at the local level. It is also the quality of the teachers, the quality of the school, as well as the quality of the curriculum. So these are just kind of big thoughts on the issue of rural development. In terms of refugees, before starting this webinar, I was actually looking at it. And there is a recent report by the ILO on the impact of Syrian refugees, the COVID virus impact of the Syrian refugees in Jordan. And let me just, if I can read it. So 47% of respondents, Syrian refugees, actually either lost their income completely, or 50%, or lost their job. So there was a job destruction, that jobs disappeared. So that's 47% of Syrians. But the fascinating result of this study, but of course it is how the study was made, is that women in the sample were less affected than the men. And the reason is that the women in the sample were in manufacturing jobs. So the manufacturing jobs, maybe they lost a little bit of income, maybe 1 month income or whatever, but they are formally employed, while the Syrian wage workers were in agriculture mostly. So we found that, you know, men were more negatively affected. Now, it looks like they didn't go into the household. However, the women in the same survey said that they have much more household responsibilities, and that they have serious concern about their safety at work. Thank you.
Thank you. I advise you also, I'm reading the Q&A and asking you the questions, but there's a chat button, as Stephanie indicated. So maybe if you find anything that's like addressed to a specific area that you're talking about, if you could answer the participants. So
Miriam, there's also a poll. I'm sorry to interrupt, but just to say we are about to post a poll. So please go check that out and give us your answer. It would be really interesting. There it is. The presenter has opened a poll. Please do take the poll now.
Okay. So there was a question. I can't see it now. But just let me open. Okay.
You had asked me a question on women, peace, and security, or you had asked a general question.
Yes.
Shall I wait till everyone answers the poll? And I believe the one on Kuwait was already answered. So with regards to women, peace, and security, I mean, it's a bit too soon to tell what impact COVID is having on, let's say, national action plans, or the implementation and drafting and implementation of national action plans. However, there have been quite a few assessments of women, peace, and security globally that have been coming out, challenging the reader to look at COVID as, you know, a threat to peace and security. And I know there's a well-known, there's a very well-written blog going around by Sanam Anderlini, the head of the Women, Peace, and Security Center at LSE. And she highlights that in many cases, it's women's local civil society leaders that are taking the lead in terms of peace building activities that they have been already engaged with, but also in terms of leading a COVID response. And so I think that's something, at least in this region, that has historically been the focus. I mean, we hear often about how women have been alienated or sidelined in formal peace processes, but we rarely hear about the fact that local women working at the local or grassroots level are often the first to respond to a crisis, the first to mediate a conflict, and have access to areas that maybe agencies, UN or international, don't have. So I would say that the women's actions are still taking place. They might not be reported, but they're definitely women are working on the front lines. I read recently about an article from Yemen of women crossing not just conflict lines, but also providing services to those not impacted by corona, but to inform them about how to stay safe. Also delivering food, etc. So in terms of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, it is being implemented whether you have a document or not, whether you have the formal stamp from the Security Council or not. Women are working on the front lines to engage different agencies, different parties to ensure that healthcare services are available, that food is available, etc. So that is, I would say, it's too soon to tell in terms of formal acknowledgement. That said, also there aren't that many national action plans in the region. I think there's only about 7 formal national action plans on women, peace, and security out of 22 Arab states. So it's still an issue that needs to be addressed in terms of formalizing the women, peace, and security agenda. But I would say that women are still taking the lead. If not at the elite or formal level, they're definitely doing it at the local or grassroots level.
Yeah, and maybe I can add something here regarding the formal level. Of course, with the economic crisis and the dire situation in Lebanon, National Action Plan need budget, and at least I'm very skeptical about the situation in terms of like funding and all the money that needs to be pumped into executing this National Action Plan. So we have also a question about, a lot of people are asking for sharing the PowerPoints that were presented or some of the studies that you talked about. So I trust that you can do that now. Also, somebody is asking about a study regarding GBV and COVID-19 in the Gulf region. Are there any studies, similarities, differences? Also, there's an interesting question. Would the panelists comment on the impact of COVID on families affected by gender discrimination and nationality laws, such as non-citizen children and spouses lacking access to COVID relief funds and instances of family separation with no citizen children? So this is one question. Also, this is a comment talking about desegregated data. The COVID response is a good opportunity to promote the establishment of the importance of DHS, at least in Lebanon, that would help in collecting data feeding into SRH and GBV by facto. What can be done at the local level when we know that many states, are failing to address needs of the most important vulnerable populations, including women and girls? Considering the current COVID situation, what types of social networks, what types of social networks, should be supported and how? So thank you, Mary, for sharing the study I just saw. So I don't know if anyone wants to answer regarding the issue of the children of women who cannot pass the nationality, or others regarding studies from the Gulf.
I shared a study from the Gulf that's from Oman specifically. I don't know, it's a UNFPA document. I put it into the chat box, although I see the person that requested it has left the chat, but it's available. It's a recently issued UNFPA document. I don't know it by heart, so I can't really talk about it, but it's there. I want to give an answer to this question on gender discrimination and nationality laws, but I'm trying to remember what context. I can't remember if I read something recently for Palestine or Jordan, and I don't want to say something that I don't have enough information on, but I know there's been some issues, at least with accessing the judicial system this is also happening in terms of getting protection orders for gender-based violence. So I know that there's been some remote hearings happening in Lebanon. I'm not sure about other countries, but this might be something that's being addressed remotely, but I will try and find some information and at least post it on the chat. But I'm sorry, I don't have more information, but I know this is a question that's coming up elsewhere.
Maybe you can check out also CRTDA. They work on issues related to nationality, and in specific, you can Google Lina Abu Habib. She's an expert on the issue and has worked extensively on it. So this is my take on the question. Mary, Lina, is there any question or comment you'd like to make regarding the questions?
I will, I don't know how much I have to add, but there's a question from Bashar Badran on the NGO sector in Jordan. And I would just like to share an experience that I am personally involved in, which is the fact that I do not think there is, while the response has been kind of gender blind, I do not think that women's organizations have been silent or silenced. There is one organization that I have worked very closely with. Their name is Sadaqa, and it is about creating the appropriate working conditions for women, focusing on childcare, transport, and other things that hinder women's economic participation. And they actually wrote the Prime Minister the fact that how do you expect women to go back to work if childcare is closed? And there was an answer from the State Minister for Communication that the government is studying what kind of childcare working women is going to be receiving. And we saw this as, might sound small, but we saw it as a great achievement that actually someone listened to the needs of women. So I am optimistic about the work of women's NGOs in ensuring that the progress we have made is maintained, and for keeping our voice in terms of our needs.
I'd like to take on the question of the Gulf states and gender-based violence in the context of COVID-19. I hope I'm around. Anyway, I'll keep talking as if everyone is listening. I don't know of any specifically, and I think that's really an interesting question because that silence is noteworthy. Now, what I am seeing for the Gulf states is how they can lead the charge in terms of the response to the pandemic in other ways with resources, et cetera. That, from what the little I have seen, has been relatively gender blind. And even more so when it comes to GBV. I think that's a delicate issue that isn't addressed head on as much as I'd like to see it. I would take a look maybe at UNFPA. I can do some research on this and see what I come across. ESCWA would certainly know more than I offhand at this stage. But I think the silence is an important one to note. And I would encourage anybody out there who has that interest to dig deeper, do the research, and get in touch with us. We'd love to publish and disseminate people's thoughts and work and opinions, whether academic or not. I think we need to continue to raise the alarm, keep momentum going, and speak out at every opportunity, not just amongst ourselves in the echo chamber, but more widely. So I hope that whoever has any curiosity or any information would cultivate that and share it with us so we can help disseminate. Thanks.
There's one more, I think, comment for Stephanie, and then maybe I'll ask the three of you to wrap up because we're approaching the end of the session. So at Stephanie, using ESCWA's convening power, how can we use the pandemic as an opportunity to encourage or push government, ministries of health, social welfare to improve access to protection services, family planning, contraception during this pandemic?
Okay, that's a very intense question. I would say, I mean, what ESCWA does is very unique in terms of what UN agencies do. So I would actually suggest maybe focusing more at the local level and in terms of what if you volunteer or work with an NGO, if there's an organization affiliated with a particular ministry that you could volunteer with or that you could contact. I would say working from the more grassroots, lower level would be more effective because we, as I said, don't work necessarily with grassroots agencies, et cetera. And so I would say that, us coming from the top, you coming from the bottom would then create an atmosphere where states are not necessarily getting pressure, but hearing, similar requests. So, we do come from a human rights-based approach. We do focus on, complying with international human rights law. And so we come from these more formal frameworks. So I would suggest, in terms of what you can do, is work at the more grassroots NGO level or civil society level, and push from that way. And work with organizations like AIW at LAU, who we partner with, as Miriam said. But I think that, I think this is more of an entry point through civil society or more localized government.
So I'm going to use my powers and not just call for them to work with us, but also to submit to a journal that we have entitled Al-Ra'ida. It's been there since '76, and we'd love for anyone who'd like to write anything about the pandemic or any issue related to gender rights in the Arab region or with a comparative perspective to other regions. And so now basically we heard a lot. There's a lot to be done. That's why we're triggering this discussion, and we're trying to see how best we can address all the topics that have been circulated. We heard a lot about the dearth of data and how important data is, and as we know, there's a lot of dearth in terms of data here. You spoke about violations, why it's important to work on them and to better the conditions of women who are violated, whether physically, psychologically, or sexually. Unfortunately, on the level of Lebanon, in terms of like the response, so many times counseling is happening online, reporting of violations. Women are scared to report via the phone, so what they're doing is they're sending text messages. There's a lot to be done. We need healthcare. This small virus has wreaked havoc to everything, as I said, that we know that's normal. So we need, as Mary said, universal healthcare, strong social protection systems, the importance of the care industry, and as Lina always tells us, you don't need to clock in and clock out. The most important thing is to do your job, and this has changed the perspective of employers vis-a-vis working from home and deliverables, etc. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to leave the three of you to conclude. We still have 5 more minutes. So to conclude and to see if you'd like to say something before we wrap up, and to see if we have any more questions. Lina, we'll start with you.
Yes, is that me? Okay, I do have actually one question that I see that I think is a really nice way to end. The question on the numbers that we've got and studies about gender discrimination and violence, and about marketing efforts that need to be put in place to communicate and push people to take action. How to push people to be involved? Well, if that's not the magical question that I have been struggling with for decades. Here's one thing I have to say, in a rare twist on my part to be somewhat optimistic. I think the most exciting thing I've seen across the region is the involvement of young people, young leaders, young women specifically. They're on the forefront of movements. The way that they work is organic, is intersectional, is inspiring, is not structured and organized in the way maybe us oldies are. So I would say communicating to those who are the, I don't like to use this word, influencers, but you understand what I mean. These are young people who are out on the streets or on social media or doing or saying, fixing whatever needs to be fixed in the countries and in the region. So whatever ways that we can learn to give them the information that they need to lead the fight and to finally win the fight that we've been struggling with all these decades, that's what I'd like to see. I don't have a magic response to how to get that to them, but I hope some of them are out there listening to it. So that's where I'd like to end. Thank you so much.
You have someone who's asked you, eager to hear what the panelists' response to the poll question could be regarding the one thing that could be done. So, Mary, can you take that on, and then Stephanie will. Sorry, you want me to repeat? Did you hear me? So I said in the chat, the Q&A, sorry, somebody had asked, she's eager to hear what panelists' response on the poll question could be regarding the one thing that could be done. So what do you think the one thing could be done is?
Wow, that's a tough one. Okay, I talked about economic security. So I think number one, what a lot of families, individuals, men, women are thinking about now is also their economic security that is not undermining any other aspect, but I would have to say that. And if you want me to just conclude quickly, I will say, Miriam, I don't think anybody knows where we are heading as a globe, as a universe. But what I do know, and since I am talking only, my focus is on the economic part, is that governments have an opportunity to address pending issues. The opportunity of pending issues, which is a stronger social protection system, achieving finally universal healthcare, finally addressing the digital divide, finally addressing informality. It is, governments today can think of how can we do things differently. Everything went haywire. So how can we, and we saw the weaknesses in those structures and where we are today. And as women activists, as people working in human rights, our role is also to focus on the same issues and work together and make our voice heard and address the pending issues that come from gender inequality that we have also been talking about for a while. Yeah, I want to be positive. We have an opportunity today.
Thank you so much. Stephanie?
Hi. Before I give my intervention, I just wanted to finish the answer when someone had asked about family law. I had just pulled up a brief from the Women's Center for Legal Aid and Counseling in Palestine. I believe you could find this brief on their website. They've been issuing them every week. I just want to read briefly. It said, over April, WCLAC provided 97 legal consultations and began 28 legal interventions. From this, 47 were related to economic abuse. Several of these cases have concerned women not receiving their agreed upon alimony or inheritance. Judicial courts in the West Bank have announced that they are not hearing new cases regarding alimony, custody, or divorce, which is causing frustration and suffering for many women. So this is happening. And I'm sure it's happening in other locations as well. But WCLAC is very good about communicating what is happening on the ground and what their interventions are. So I just wanted to share that if anyone wants to go to their website to learn more. So in terms of a follow-up to Lina's and Mary's wonderful interventions, I would like to just maybe build up on the last question I answered and saying getting involved and pushing government, pushing local government to make change. Whatever your issue is, whatever your concern is, whether it's focused on GBV, economic, political participation, etc., get involved. And it doesn't have to be out on the streets. It doesn't have to be every day clock in. I mean, I realize with the lockdown, it's more difficult, but I mean, there are many opportunities online. Use your skills, use your interests. I think there's many opportunities that can be approached from, like I said, the grassroots or the bottom-up approach. So thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been really, really interesting. If anyone wants the studies, they can email us. My colleague has put out the email account, Mufida. I just want to thank Mufida, to CE, Sherbil, Robin, Linda, and everyone who made this possible. And please write to us and tell us if you're interested in more webinars that we can organize here at LAU and the Arab Institute for Women. It was great having you all. Thank you all for joining us. And if you have any questions, please make sure to send them directly to our email account. I don't know if my colleague is still there. It's the aiw@lau.edu.lb, because I'm not sure that it will appear on the screen. So thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Lina. And we finished at 6:30.
Thank you very much, Miriam, and thank you everybody for the excellent questions. This was a pleasure.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. It was great to hear everyone.
Thank you all. Well done. Let's keep this conversation going.